The city lights of New York flickered through the large windows of Diddy's penthouse. It was late, and the streets below were alive with the sounds of honking cars, distant chatter, and the occasional siren. Diddy, once known as Sean Combs, stood by the glass, phone in hand, staring at the screen. He had just received a call that shook him to his core. The voice on the other end was familiar, too familiar. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, a voice from a time he had tried to forget. "Do you remember me?" the voice had asked, before the line went dead. His heart pounded in his chest. How could he forget? The past had a way of catching up with him, even after all these years of success, fame, and fortune. He tried calling the number back, but there was no answer. Whoever it was didn't want to talk, at least not yet. As he paced the room, his mind raced with questions. Who could it be? Why now? Diddy hadn't thought about those days in a long time, but now, it seemed, the past was knocking at his door, demanding to be heard. He stared at the city, wondering if this call was just the beginning of something bigger. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message. He hesitated before opening it, but curiosity got the better of him. The message read, "We need to talk. Tomorrow. Same place. You know where." Diddy's heart skipped a beat. The same place? He knew exactly what they meant. It was a place he swore he would never return to. But now, it seemed like he had no choice. The chapter ends with Diddy making a decision to confront his past, no matter how dangerous it might be. Sean Combs, known to the world as Diddy, wasn't always the music mogul he is today. He grew up in Harlem, one of New York's most vibrant yet challenging neighborhoods. From a young age, Diddy had big dreams. He didn't just want to be successful, he wanted to change the world with his music. Diddy's love for music started early. He would spend hours listening to records, studying the beats, the rhythms, and the lyrics. Music was his escape from the tough life in the city, a way to imagine a future where anything was possible. But life wasn't always easy. His father was killed when Diddy was just a child, leaving his mother to raise him alone. She worked hard to provide for him, and her strength became his inspiration. Diddy promised himself that he would make it big, not just for him, but for her too. As a teenager, he hustled hard, taking any opportunity he could find to get closer to the music industry. He started promoting parties, working behind the scenes, and learning everything he could about the business. Diddy knew that talent wasn't enough. He needed to understand how the industry worked if he wanted to succeed. But it wasn't until he got his first big break at Uptown Records that his life truly changed. The chapter ends with Diddy getting a call from Uptown Records, offering him the opportunity that would set him on the path to becoming a global star. Diddy's journey to the top wasn't smooth. After landing a job at Uptown Records, he worked hard, proving himself to be one of the best in the business. He had a knack for spotting talent, and soon, he became a key figure in shaping the careers of some of the biggest names in the industry. But Diddy wasn't satisfied with just being behind the scenes. He wanted more. He had dreams of creating his own music, his own legacy. And so, he took a bold step. He left Uptown Records and started his own label, Bad Boy Records. Starting his own label was a huge risk. Diddy had to put everything on the line, his time, his money, and his reputation. But he believed in himself, and more importantly, he believed in the artists he was working with. One of his first signings was a young rapper named the Notorious B.I.G., a decision that would change the course of hip-hop history. With Diddy standing in his new, small office, surrounded by paperwork and ideas, ready to take on the world, he had no idea that Bad Boy Records would soon become one of the most successful labels in the industry. As Diddy built Bad Boy Records, the label quickly became a force to be reckoned with. His eye for talent, combined with his business smarts, helped him shape the careers of artists like the Notorious B.I.G., Faith Evans, and Mace. But Diddy wasn't just behind the scenes, he was also starting to make a name for himself as an artist. In 1997, Diddy released his debut album, No Way Out, which included hit songs like Can't Nobody Hold Me Down and I'll Be Missing You, a tribute to his close friend, the Notorious B.I.G., who had been tragically killed. The success of No Way Out catapulted Diddy into superstardom. Suddenly, he wasn't just the man behind the artists, he was the artist. The album sold millions of copies, and Diddy found himself at the top of the charts, living the life he had always dreamed of. But with success came challenges. Fame brought a level of pressure that Diddy hadn't anticipated. The music industry was ruthless, and every move he made was under scrutiny. The chapter ends with Diddy standing on stage, accepting an award, but feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. Diddy had achieved what most people could only dream of. He was now a household name, not just in America, but around the world. The fame, the money, and the success came pouring in. His name was synonymous with luxury, and his parties were legendary, filled with celebrities, models, and musicians. Diddy was living the high life, but deep down, he knew that everything had a cost. His first big hit, Can't Nobody Hold Me Down, became the anthem of his rise. The song was everywhere, on the radio, in clubs, and on television. Fans couldn't get enough of him, and the media followed his every move. People saw him as untouchable, a symbol of the American dream. But behind the scenes, Diddy was still grappling with the loss of his friend, the notorious B.I.G., and the pressures of running a growing empire. Despite the challenges, Diddy continued to push forward. He launched new artists, expanded his record label, and ventured into other businesses. Fashion, liquor, television. There was no industry Diddy wouldn't touch. He was determined to build an empire that would last for generations. However, as Diddy's fame grew, so did the rumors. The press often painted him as arrogant or ruthless, and the music industry, notorious for its cutthroat nature, was no different. Diddy learned that the higher he climbed, the more enemies he made. There were whispers of betrayal, lawsuits, and rivalries, but Diddy kept his focus on his goals. He knew that in the world of fame, trust was hard to come by. With Diddy looking out at a packed concert crowd, knowing that the public only saw a fraction of the man he truly was, what would happen if they knew the full story? Would they still cheer for him? With the success of Bad Boy Records, Diddy had built a reputation as one of the smartest and most influential figures in the music industry. But success came with challenges. There were constant demands on his time, and every decision felt like it carried the weight of his entire empire. Diddy's relationships also started to feel the strain. His family, who had always been his support system, found it difficult to keep up with his fast-paced lifestyle. He was away from home for long stretches, traveling from city to city, performing, and making deals. The pressure was immense. In his personal life, Diddy had a complicated love life. He had been in relationships with some of the most high-profile women in the industry, but the pressures of fame made it hard to maintain stability. His children were growing up, and Diddy wanted to be a good father, but balancing work and family wasn't easy. He often felt torn between his responsibilities as a businessman and as a dad. Despite these challenges, Diddy remained resilient. He had built everything from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let anything or anyone stop him. But deep down, he knew that the life he was living was exhausting. Fame had its rewards, but it also came with isolation. Who could he really trust? With Diddy sitting alone in his mansion, surrounded by wealth, but feeling an emptiness that no amount of success could fill. Throughout Diddy's journey, one constant remained: his love for his family. His mother, Janice, had been there from the beginning, supporting him through the tough times. She had always believed in his dreams, even when they seemed impossible. Diddy often credited his success to her strength and determination. Diddy's children were also a big part of his life. He was a father to 6 kids, and they meant the world to him. He wanted to provide them with a better life than he had growing up, and he worked hard to make sure they had everything they needed. But Diddy also worried about raising his children in the public eye. He didn't want them to feel the pressure that came with being part of his world. He also had close friends in the industry, people he considered family. His longtime collaborators, like Quincy Jones and Clive Davis, had mentored him, and artists like Mary J. Blige and Lil' Kim had become part of his inner circle. They had been with him through the highs and the lows, and Diddy cherished their loyalty. However, as his fame grew, Diddy started to notice that not everyone around him had his best interests at heart. Some people were only there for the perks, the parties, and the fame. The higher he rose, the more cautious he became about who he let into his life. With Diddy receiving a call from an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, the friend warns him to be careful, hinting that not everyone in his circle can be trusted. Diddy begins to wonder if the mysterious call from earlier has anything to do with this. Diddy's success wasn't just limited to being an artist and producer, he was also a savvy businessman. After founding Bad Boy Records, he began to expand into other ventures. His clothing line, Sean John, became a huge hit, earning him millions and solidifying his status as a fashion mogul. Diddy also launched a successful vodka brand, Kirak, which became one of the top-selling spirits in the world. His business ventures made him one of the wealthiest figures in the entertainment industry, but they also brought new pressures. Every move he made was scrutinized by the public, and Diddy knew that one wrong decision could cost him everything. But Diddy was always thinking ahead. He knew that the music industry was constantly changing, and he wanted to stay ahead of the curve. He invested in technology companies, film production, and even started his own television network, Revolt TV. Despite his success, Diddy's empire was built on hard work and risk. He had seen others in the industry rise and fall, and he was determined not to let that happen to him. But with so many people watching his every move, Diddy knew that one mistake could bring everything crashing down. Diddy couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The mysterious messages were becoming more frequent, and each one was more cryptic than the last. Whoever was behind them knew a lot about his life. Things that only a few close people would know. The latest message had arrived late at night, just after Diddy finished a long day of meetings. It read, "Watch your back. You don't know who you can trust." Diddy sat in his office, the city's lights twinkling in the distance. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture. His heart skipped a beat. It was an old photo, one he hadn't seen in years. In it, Diddy stood with his former mentor and friend, the late Notorious B.I.G. The picture was taken just days before Biggie's death, a loss that had haunted Diddy for years. Who would send this? And why now? Diddy quickly called his security team, instructing them to trace the number, but the trail went cold. Whoever was doing this knew how to cover their tracks. As he paced the room, Diddy's mind raced back to the early days, when he was still hustling, when he made promises he couldn't always keep, when friendships and rivalries blurred. Could it be someone from the past? Someone who wanted revenge? With Diddy staring at the photo, knowing that his past was coming back to haunt him, but unsure of who to trust or what would happen next. Diddy had always known the music industry was a dangerous place. Behind the glamour, fame, and money, there were secrets. Secrets that could ruin lives. He had been in the game long enough to see friends turn into enemies, and deals that seemed too good to be true suddenly fall apart. One of the biggest secrets was that success didn't come without a price. There were unspoken rules, alliances that could either make or break you. Diddy had navigated this world carefully, making sure he stayed ahead of the curve. But now, it seemed like someone was playing a game with him, using his own past against him. In the music world, people didn't forget. Rivalries from decades ago could suddenly resurface. And with the level of success Diddy had reached, he knew that envy was always lurking. Some people wanted to take what he had built, to see him fall. As Diddy sat down with his team, they began discussing the recent threats. His head of security, Marcus, had been with him for years. Marcus was loyal, but even he seemed concerned. These messages, they're not random. Whoever's sending them knows you, knows your life. They've been watching you for a long time. With Diddy making a decision to investigate further, he instructs Marcus to dig deep into the past, to find out who might want to come after him. Diddy knew that if he didn't act fast, the game could turn deadly. Diddy found himself driving through the old streets of Harlem. It had been years since he'd last visited the neighborhood where he grew up. The city had changed, but some things remained the same. The corner stores, the old school, the faces of people who had been there since the beginning. It all brought back memories. He parked the car and got out, walking the streets that had once been his entire world. This was where it all started. The hustle, the drive to succeed, the hunger to prove himself. It was also where he had made enemies. Diddy had always been ambitious, but his climb to the top hadn't been without stepping on a few toes. As he walked past an old barber shop, he saw some familiar faces. A group of old men sitting outside nodded at him as he passed. "Puffy, you still out here making moves, huh?" one of them called out. Diddy smiled, nodding in acknowledgement, but his mind was elsewhere. The memories flooded back. Good times, tough times, and everything in between. This was where he had learned the rules of survival. But as he walked through the neighborhood, Diddy realized something important. His rise to fame had left scars, not just on him, but on others too. He had crossed paths with people who hadn't forgotten, and some of them were still around. One name kept coming up in his thoughts, an old friend turned rival named Jay, who had been close to Diddy in the early days. They had started together, grinding and hustling in the music industry. But their paths had diverged when success came knocking, and bitterness had taken root. Could Jay be the one behind the messages? Diddy decided to reach out to Jay. It had been years since they last spoke, but if anyone knew what was going on, it might be him. With his phone in hand, Diddy dialed the number he hadn't used in over a decade. The line rang, and just before it clicked over to voicemail, a voice answered. "Puff, I wondered when you'd call," said Jay, his voice low and steady. With Diddy frozen in place, his old friend's voice on the other end of the line, leaving him wondering what Jay knew, and whether he was friend or foe. Diddy arranged to meet Jay at a quiet restaurant in the city. When he arrived, Jay was already there, seated at a corner booth with a calm yet guarded expression. They hadn't seen each other in years, and while the tension between them was obvious, there was also a shared history that couldn't be denied. The two men exchanged small talk, but the weight of the unspoken questions hung in the air. Finally, Diddy leaned forward. "I've been getting these messages. Somebody's watching me, sending warnings. I need to know if it's you." Jay raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm behind it?" He shook his head. "Nah, Puff. I've moved on from all that. We had our differences, but I'm not about to play games with your life." Diddy studied him for a moment, trying to read between the lines. Jay was always good at hiding his true intentions, but there was something in his tone that felt sincere. "So, if it's not you, then who?" Diddy asked. Jay took a sip of his drink, eyes narrowed in thought. "You made a lot of enemies on your way up. People don't forget. Could be someone from the old days, someone who feels like you owe them." The conversation took a darker turn as Jay reminded Diddy of a few names from their past. People who had been close, but who had fallen out with Diddy over deals gone wrong or perceived slights. Diddy had always been focused on success, sometimes at the cost of friendships. With Jay offering Diddy a piece of advice: "Watch your back, Puff. Not everyone you left behind is happy with where you're at now." After the meeting with Jay, Diddy's mind was racing. He had always known that success came with a price, but now it felt like that price was catching up with him. The warnings were coming more frequently, and they were getting personal. Whoever was behind them wasn't just threatening his business, they were targeting his life, his legacy. Back at his office, Diddy convened a private meeting with his most trusted team members. Marcus, his head of security, laid out the latest findings. "We traced the calls, but whoever's behind this is using burner phones. They know what they're doing." Diddy nodded, frustration simmering beneath the surface. He wasn't used to feeling this out of control. "We need to get ahead of this," he said, his voice firm. "I want eyes on everyone I've ever had a problem with." As the team worked on a plan, Diddy's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message, it was a video. With a sinking feeling, Diddy opened the file. The video showed footage of him at one of his private parties, talking to a woman he recognized as a former business associate. The caption read, "Not everything stays in the past." With Diddy staring at the screen, realizing that someone had been watching him for a long time, and they had more information than he was comfortable with. The game was getting more dangerous, and the stakes were higher than ever. The messages were no longer just warnings, they were threats. Each new piece of information was more invasive than the last. Diddy's team was working around the clock to track down the source, but the deeper they dug, the more elusive the culprit became. It was as if the person behind it knew every move Diddy made before he made it. In his personal life, the stress was beginning to show. His children noticed the change in him, and his friends were starting to ask questions. Diddy had always been good at keeping his private life separate from his public persona, but now the lines were blurring. He couldn't sleep, constantly looking over his shoulder, wondering who was coming for him next. During a meeting with his lawyers, Diddy was presented with a new problem. An old business deal was being brought up again, this time with accusations that could damage his reputation. It was clear that whoever was after him wasn't just trying to scare him, they were trying to destroy him. The chapter ends with Diddy receiving yet another message, this time containing an ultimatum. If you don't settle old scores, the whole world will know your secrets. The tension continues to build as Diddy is forced to confront his past and the people he left behind. The mystery of who is behind the threats deepens, with Diddy caught between protecting his empire and uncovering the truth. With each chapter, the stakes rise, leading to more suspense and unanswered questions, keeping viewers on the edge of their seats. Diddy felt a surge of determination as he sat alone in his office late at night, contemplating the latest message. He knew that to protect his legacy, he had to confront the demons from his past. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions. The time had come to face those he had wronged and find out what they knew. He pulled out his phone and began making calls. The first was to an old friend, Lil Kim, who had been in the industry alongside him. She had always been a reliable source of information and had a knack for knowing what was happening behind the scenes. After a few rings, she answered, her voice filled with surprise. Diddy, it's been a minute. What's up? Kim, I need your help, he said, keeping his tone serious. I'm dealing with some threats, and I think they're coming from someone I've crossed in the past. Can we meet? Of course, let's meet at my place, she replied. I might have some insight into what's going on. As he drove across the city to Lil Kim's house, Diddy's mind raced. He thought about the relationships he had built and the ones that had fallen apart. The music industry was a fickle world, where loyalties could shift in an instant, and friendships could turn to animosity over something as simple as a missed opportunity. When he arrived at Kim's house, he was greeted with a warm hug. You look stressed, Diddy. What's going on? She asked, leading him to her living room. I've been getting these messages, and they are getting more personal. I need to figure out who's behind them before it escalates, he confessed. Kim's expression turned serious. I've heard whispers. People are talking. It's a rough business, Puff. You know that. But I have a feeling this is coming from someone who feels betrayed. Have you thought about reaching out to Biggie's family? They might know something. Diddy's heart sank at the mention of Biggie. The memories of their friendship flooded back, along with the pain of losing him. I haven't spoken to them in years. Do you really think they'd want to help? Sometimes the past can be a bridge to the present, she said wisely. Reach out to them. They might have insights you wouldn't expect. With Diddy contemplating Kim's advice, knowing he had to swallow his pride and seek help from those he hadn't spoken to in a long time. It was a risk, but one he was willing to take if it meant uncovering the truth. The next day, Diddy found himself dialing the number of Valletta Wallace, Biggie's mother. His heart raced as the phone rang. Would she even want to talk to him after all this time? When she answered, her voice was firm but filled with warmth. Hello, Ms. Wallace, it's Diddy, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I know it's been a while, but I need to speak with you. I'm in some trouble, and I think you might be able to help. There was a pause on the other end before she responded. Diddy, you were like a son to me. I can't just forget the past. But if you're reaching out, it must be serious. What's going on? He took a deep breath and explained the situation, detailing the messages, the threats, and the feeling that someone from his past was coming back to haunt him. He felt vulnerable opening up, but he knew it was necessary. I believe the person behind this might have ties to our old days in the industry, he finished. I'll help you, Valletta said firmly, but you need to be prepared to face the truth about your past. Not everything was as it seemed back then, and I hope you understand the implications of what you're asking. Diddy nodded, even though she couldn't see him. I understand. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. They arranged to meet at a cafe in Brooklyn, a place that held significance for both of them. As Diddy drove there, he thought about the countless times he had come to this neighborhood with Biggie, dreaming of success and fame. Now, he was returning, but this time with the weight of his choices bearing down on him. When he arrived, he found Valletta already seated, her presence commanding yet nurturing. "Diddy," she said, her eyes piercing through him. "You've changed, but I can see the old Puff still inside." As they talked, Valletta shared stories of Biggie, of dreams they had shared, and the burdens they had carried. She revealed that she had heard whispers of resentment brewing in the industry, especially from those who felt left behind when Diddy's career took off. "People don't forget, especially when they feel wronged," she warned. "You need to tread carefully. Your past is a part of who you are, but it doesn't have to define you." With Diddy feeling a mix of hope and dread, he knew he had to confront the ghosts of his past, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for the truth that might come to light. After his meeting with Valletta, Diddy felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had the support of someone who understood the complexities of the industry, and he was determined to uncover the truth behind the threats. Armed with Valletta's insights, he enlisted his team to dig deeper. They started by looking into old associates and contacts from his early days in the industry. The search led them down a rabbit hole of old records, forgotten feuds, and unsolved disputes. Diddy was reminded of the sacrifices he made and the friendships he lost along the way. Each name they uncovered brought back memories, both good and bad. One name stood out, a former producer named Reggie, who had been pivotal in Diddy's rise to fame but had left the industry under suspicious circumstances. The rumors had always hinted at betrayal and greed, suggesting that Reggie felt Diddy had taken credit for his work. Diddy recalled the last conversation he had with Reggie. It had been heated, with accusations flying from both sides. "I gave you your start, Puff. Don't forget that," Reggie had shouted before walking away. At the time, Diddy had brushed it off, thinking it was just the heat of the moment. But now, it seemed all too relevant. He decided it was time to confront Reggie. If anyone had a reason to harbor resentment, it would be him. Diddy instructed Marcus to locate Reggie, and within a few hours, they found him living in a modest apartment in a neighborhood not too far from where they grew up. As Diddy prepared to meet him, he felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Would Reggie even want to talk? And if he did, what kind of truth would he reveal? With Diddy standing outside Reggie's apartment, hand hovering over the doorbell, he took a deep breath and pressed it, bracing himself for whatever came next. The door creaked open, revealing Reggie's surprised face. "Diddy, is that you?" he asked, eyes wide in disbelief. "Yeah, it's me," Diddy replied, stepping inside. The small apartment was cluttered but cozy, filled with music posters and old records. It felt like a time capsule from their early days. "What brings you here after all this time?" Reggie asked, his tone cautious. Diddy could sense the tension in the air. "I need to talk," Diddy said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been getting threats, and I think they are connected to our past. I want to know if you've heard anything or if you know who might be behind it." Reggie's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. "Threats? From who?" Diddy recounted the messages he had received, watching as Reggie's face changed with each detail. Finally, Reggie sighed. "I've been hearing whispers too. People are upset about how things went down between us. Some think you owe them for their part in your success. Look, I didn't mean to leave anyone behind. It was never personal," Diddy said, frustration bubbling to the surface. "But I need to know if you're involved. This is serious." Reggie hesitated before speaking. "I'm not involved, Diddy. I may have been angry, but I wouldn't stoop to that level. There are others, though, who might be looking to settle old scores." "Like who?" Diddy pressed, feeling a sense of urgency. Reggie leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You should look into some of the producers you worked with back in the day. Not everyone was happy with how things played out." With Diddy feeling a mix of relief and frustration, Reggie's denial was a small comfort, but now he had new leads to pursue. Time was running out, and the threats loomed over him like a dark cloud. After the meeting with Reggie, Diddy gathered his team to discuss the new leads. They spent hours going over old contacts, digging through industry gossip, and piecing together the puzzle. Diddy knew that to find out who was behind the threats, he had to follow every lead, no matter how small. As they delved deeper, one name kept coming up. Vanessa, a talented producer who had worked closely with Diddy in the early days of his career. Vanessa had been instrumental in crafting some of his biggest hits, but she had disappeared from the industry just as Diddy's fame skyrocketed. The rumors suggested that she had been pushed out, but no one knew the full story. Diddy remembered Vanessa well. She had been fierce, driven, and incredibly talented. They had clashed a few times over creative differences, but he had always respected her work. He hadn't heard from her in years, but now, with her name resurfacing, he couldn't ignore the possibility that she might hold the key to these mysterious threats. Vanessa, Diddy muttered as he scanned the information his team had pulled together. Do we know where she is now? She's been laying low, Marcus replied, scrolling through his tablet. Last known location was LA, but she's kept off the radar since then. No social media, no public appearances. That's where we'll start, Diddy decided. We need to track her down. The following morning, Diddy and his team boarded a flight to Los Angeles. As the plane soared across the sky, Diddy's thoughts raced. What if Vanessa was behind the threats? What if her silence all these years had been fueled by anger or resentment? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting closer to the truth, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. When they landed in LA, Diddy wasted no time. They scoured industry contacts, made calls, and visited old haunts where Vanessa had once been a regular. The search led them to a small recording studio tucked away in a quiet part of the city. It was an unassuming place, but the kind of spot where serious musicians went to work. As Diddy approached the studio, his heart pounded in his chest. Was this it? Was Vanessa inside, waiting to reveal the truth? Diddy hesitated for a moment, standing outside the studio, gathering his thoughts. What if confronting her opened up old wounds? What if the conversation spiraled into something more dangerous? But he knew he had come too far to turn back now. He signaled to Marcus and the rest of his team to stay back. This was something he had to handle alone. With a deep breath, Diddy pushed the door open and stepped inside. The space was small but filled with music equipment, and there, sitting at a soundboard, was Vanessa. She looked up, startled by the sudden presence of her old collaborator. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared history hung in the air, thick with unresolved tension. Diddy, Vanessa said finally, her voice calm but guarded. I didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, it's been a long time, Diddy replied, stepping closer. I've been getting these messages, threats, and I think someone from our past is behind them. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. And you think it's me? I don't know what to think, Diddy admitted, trying to keep his tone even. But your name keeps coming up. I'm just trying to find out the truth. Vanessa stood up, crossing her arms as she walked toward him. The truth? Huh? You're finally interested in the truth after all these years? You have no idea what you left behind, do you? Diddy frowned, confused by her words. What do you mean? You think you made it to the top on your own, Vanessa said, her voice rising with emotion. But people like me, we were there in the trenches with you, building that empire. And then, when you didn't need us anymore, we disappeared. You got the fame, the fortune, but what did we get? Diddy felt a pang of guilt as her words sunk in. He had always prided himself on his hard work and vision, but in his pursuit of success, he had forgotten about the people who had helped him along the way. Vanessa, I didn't mean to leave you behind. Well, you did, she snapped. And now, after all these years, you come here accusing me of being behind some threats? You think I care about revenge? Diddy took a step back, realizing how wrong he had been. I'm sorry, he said softly. I came here looking for answers, but I can see now that I made a mistake. This isn't about revenge for you. Vanessa's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she let out a bitter laugh. No, Diddy, it's not. I'm not interested in threatening you. I moved on a long time ago, but maybe you should look at the people you've hurt along the way, the ones who didn't move on so easily. With Diddy standing in the studio, shaken by Vanessa's words, he had come looking for a villain, but instead, he had found a reflection of his own past mistakes. As he left the studio, his mind raced with new questions. If Vanessa wasn't behind the threats, then who was? And how many more people from his past were out there, still nursing old wounds? Back in New York, Diddy felt a growing sense of unease. The confrontation with Vanessa had left him feeling exposed, vulnerable in ways he hadn't anticipated. He thought the threats were simply a part of the dangerous world he inhabited, but now he realized they were much more personal. One night, as he sat alone in his penthouse, his phone buzzed with a new message. He glanced at it, expecting another vague threat, but this time, the message was different. It was more direct, more chilling. You can't run from your past forever. We're closer than you think. Diddy's blood ran cold as he read the words. He stood up, pacing the room, trying to think of who could be behind it. Who was still holding on to the pain and resentment from all those years ago? His mind raced through names, faces, old connections, people who had once been close to him but had drifted away or been cast aside. Just as he was about to call Marcus, there was a knock at the door. Diddy froze, heart pounding. It was late, far too late for visitors. Slowly, he approached the door and looked through the peephole. On the other side, a shadowy figure stood, their face obscured by the dim hallway light.